Okay, so I'm just going to kind of introduce what we've got. So we've kind of got three kind of chunks for this session. So Bruce is going to talk a little bit about, well, I've got GIS CVs there, but kind of CVs in general with a bit of GIS related stuff. We've got the AGI ECR network. We've got a representative from the AGI whose name escapes me because I didn't put it on the slide, sorry, who will say a little bit about that. Tom, I think it was. And then we'll have the careers panel. So we've got 5 different people who've done GIS in some form. And then we've got to talk, they're going to say a little bit about their careers. So we've got Sam Jones, who I haven't spotted yet, Charles Thompson, who I think is on his way as well, Christopher Evan Gelders, who's here. Thank you, Christopher. Paul Monday, who I know isn't here yet because he said he couldn't make it to 1, and Jo Wilkin, who's also not here yet because she couldn't make it. She is here, but no video yet. But we'll hear from them in due course. Great. One thing I wanted to ask is it would be good to have a quick poll. We haven't got the poll in Zoom set up, but if you could just put in the chat what your kind of current status are. So are you a master's student? Are you a PhD student? Or are you some other a postdoc or whatever your kind of current position is? It'd be great to get a feel of how many of each we've got in the room. Great. Oh, thanks for that. So I think, you know, that's probably mostly PhD students, I would say, from that, and various other some master's students and a few people, data scientist intern, which is great, a couple of interns, in fact, postdocs as well. That's great, and a few people of PhD students and part-time RAs or part-time something else. So that's great. No, it's just useful for us to know kind of where people are. One of the kind of things I wanted to highlight is that we've got in the slide at the moment is, you know, this is PhD students, but the principle applies to master students as well. What do they do after their degree? What do you do after your degree? And this is all of UK PhD students. So just to give you an idea, and, you know, after they finish their PhD, 53% don't ever work in a university. So, you know, you'll hear a lot about academic career paths, and in my experience, universities tend to be fairly bad at careers advice for PhD students. I know certainly when I was one, there was the careers service, but they were all geared up for undergraduate students, so they had practically nothing to offer me. And then, you know, there's often this expectation that doing a PhD will get you a career in academia, and that is just not true, frankly. You know, we can see the statistics there. That's from 2013, so, you know, it will have changed a bit, but I can't see the percentage staying in university will go up. If we follow it through the various different stages, you know, we've got 47% doing early career research of some description. So this is usually be a postdoc. And then another 20% go off into non-university research, so industry, government, whatever that may be. And then only, you know, 30-ish% will be taken on as permanent research staff, and only 3.5% will only ever work in a university. So, you know, there are a lot of other options out there for careers, and we wanted to use this time to explain a bit about what the different options are. So of the 5 people on our careers panel, 4 of them are outside academia, and that is intentional to kind of highlight what some of the other options are. So, you know, the first time I saw this, I was surprised, but the more you look into it, the more, you know, this is very typical. So it's an important thing to remember. Great. Okay. So I'll hand over to Bruce now to do his bit on CVs, and you can always add to what I said, Bruce, if you want.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, I always like that diagram of Nick's because I think it does make a point. I hear and see my colleagues sort of encouraging people into PhDs and sort of making illusions that you will all end up as lecturers and professors in universities, and that, I'm afraid, is increasingly not the case. 30, 40 years ago, it maybe was the case that most people with PhDs went on to become lecturers. But that isn't something to kind of be depressed about, because it does still mean that you are being set up to be effective researchers. And research, of course, is not just carried out in universities. As Nick said, research institutes of various sorts, but also in local government, central government in particular, there's a lot of research goes on. So your skills, the skills you develop as a PhD in terms of being able to do that, detailed, focused form of research is a rare skill, and it's something to be valued, and is valued, as I say, across different sectors, including indeed industry, where you even just having the doctor in front of your name is valuable in the consultancy world. I'm sure Nick can attest to that. On the business card, it gives you that degree of credibility that is then linked to this ability to do research. Anyway, that's not my topic for this morning. So welcome back again. We're over 50 now. Goodness me. Those of you who ran away this morning when we asked that you introduce each other have come back, which is great. Do introduce yourself and get to know people. That's worth doing. So what I want to talk about, I'm going to rattle through these slides fairly quickly on the basis that this is being recorded, so you can always go back and review them, is just talking about CVs. And the title I've chosen actually quite carefully. In fact, there's two things I've chosen quite carefully on this slide. One is the title, and sometimes we do forget that a CV is about selling yourself. And the second thing I have chosen quite carefully on this slide is that it is a University of Edinburgh corporate slide, which do look a little bit vomitsome sometimes. But again, it is about projecting that image, whether you're giving a presentation, where you're trying to project your work, yourself, as a potential, if you're a master's student, a potential PhD candidate, if you're a PhD candidate, a potential research assistant, lecturer, whatever. It's about showing that you care about image. I'm the worst person in some ways to give this presentation, because I don't care very much about image, but I've kind of learned why and how it's important. So this is about image, and it's about projecting yourself. So the first question we have to ask is, what the purpose of writing a CV is. What are you actually trying to achieve? Well, pretty obvious. You're trying to get a job, but what kind of job, and how you frame your CV may vary depending on the type of job you're trying to get. But that's not the only reason we use CVs. We use CVs when we're within the world of work to gain promotion. So we're trying to remind those around us, remind our boss, remind our boss's boss, remind sometimes a completely anonymous promotions panel that we're doing good work. So that's another way you can use a CV. And again, that might mean your CV has to have a slightly different form. And increasingly also we get annual reviews at work, whether that's in the academic sector, whether that's in the commercial sector. And usually a CV will form part of that. So you're keeping this document up to date, and you're using that again to remind your boss what you've done in the past year, why you're valuable to the organization, the company, or whatever it is, and hopefully get yourself a positive review. CVs can be very different. So if you're going for commercial jobs, CVs tend to be short and to the point, ideally tailored to the particular job. So some people will simply leave their CV as a static document and tailor the cover letter. That's probably not enough. You need to change the skills that you put down depending on the particular role you're looking for, perhaps emphasize skills that you're not so strong in, that you will strengthen if you get an interview for that particular role. So you do have to change the CV as well as the cover letter. And then there's the academic CV, which is a completely different beast. So the academic CV, my academic CV runs, I think, now to about 20 pages, enormously tedious document, but it kind of documents everything I've done in my career. And that's what's kind of expected as an academic CV. You're expected to have all your previous roles, all your sub roles, so committees and representations that you have within your university. You're expected to have all the presentations you've given. You're expected to have all the publications you've presented. So the CV can be very, very long. So very different beasts. And the other point that's just worthy of remembering is that the CV is a useful record of your achievements and your career. So often, and again, I'm as guilty as anybody on this one, I tend to update my CV when I need to update it. So, if I've got an annual review, I'll update my short CV, my long CV, I forget to update very often, and it's only when I'm asked to do something and I'm asked for my CV, I think, oh gosh, I've got to update it. And of course, by that time, you've kind of forgotten all sorts of things that need to go on it, and it takes you a rather long time to remember it. So actually, it's rather useful to use the CV as a bit of a database in terms of the things that you've done. So you've got that record.
Just to chuck in a couple of...
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. Go for it.
If you go back to the previous slide.
Yep, sure.
In terms of, if you look at any of the kind of resources online for academic CVs, you may well come across the American terminology of resume or CV. And in that instance, resume is the kind of short CV version of professional CV, if you want, and then CV is the academic CV that we're talking about here. So you might come across that. And the point about recording what you do, that's really, really important. I'm a chartered geographer with the Royal Geographical Society, and as a part of that, they ask us to record all of our CPD, our continuing professional development, and I use that as the log, and that's a really useful habit to get into, to say, what did you do to help you think about what skills you've learned, what you've done, and they make us submit that every year. So that's a really useful, stick, essentially, for me, to make sure I do it, because if I don't, they send me emails saying, why haven't you done it? So that's how it works for me.
Yeah, no, very good point. And most areas of work that you will enter, including the academic work in terms of the Higher Education Academy, require some form of CPD. Some are very, very strong. So if you're involved in surveying, for example, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, which operates in the UK, but also around the world, have a very, very strong CPD component. So yeah, very, very good point, Nick. Thank you for that. Okay, let's canter on. So yeah, making an impact. You need to stand out from the crowd. The obvious one is when you're applying for a job. Often, for particular roles, there will be tens, if not hundreds, of applicants. So you need to think about how you will stand out. You need to make your CV very accessible. You need to have the key information right at the top, so that recruiters, HR departments can make decisions. It's often worth bearing in mind that it is a recruiter or an HR department rather than a GI specialist who will be having the first tranche in your CV. So they will not be experts in GI. Therefore, if you haven't got certain keywords in that CV that match the job description, you will find yourself on the reject pile very, very quickly. So you need to stand out for the crowd. There are different ways of doing that, certainly having the information there. I had a student many years ago who swore by a Dayglow yellow CV on the basis that it certainly stood out in the pile, and we probably guarantee that it would be at least read. If not, you would get the job. So there are different ways of standing out. As I say, tailor your CV to make sure it's targeted, not just the cover letter, which is often what people will do. So make sure that the most relevant experience for the particular role you're applying for is right there at the top and highlighted. Include something unusual. So in terms of things like hobbies and interests, for example, other things you've done in your life, putting something unusual in there is always useful because it will almost guarantee you a talking point at interview, which is good because it's good to have something that you can, that's an easy question at interview rather than a difficult question. Think about the style of your CV. I've got some examples in a minute or two. There are clearly very boring styles that are just all black and white and all in the same font and not terribly nicely laid out. You can make your CV much more interesting because, like anything else, it's like as PhD students, most of you will have marked undergraduate lectures. You get bored silly going through a pile of your undergraduate essays. So think about what peps your CV up that makes it stand out, so that it makes it more interesting. Color, as I mentioned, use color. Most CVs are sent electronically these days, so you can use, don't use bright garish shades, but you can use subtle color just to make your CV look nicer, look a little bit better. I'm very bad in terms of style. I'm not an artistic person at all. I'm a techno geek, as I said to some of you earlier on. But yeah, look at some of the examples out there on the web, and there are thousands of them, and pick one that appeals to you, but pick one that's a little bit different and looks nice. I've got some do's and don'ts. For a commercial job application, non-academic CV, 2 pages maximum, that's 2 sides. Put your most recent events first. So an awful lot of people list things chronologically. So they start off with what school they went to and their school certificates. That's not going to be what gets you a job once you've got a PhD. In fact, you might question as to whether you even want to put these on there anymore. So make sure you do reverse chronological. So the most recent, most relevant things appear first. Minimize the number of words. Some people use an awful lot of words in the CV, and I spend my time looking at examples of student CVs for them, and I usually end up cutting out about half the words that are there. They're not necessary. Your CV, you should be able to absorb it at a glance. You shouldn't have to read it. You should simply be able to quickly glance through it and say yes, no, and that often is as much time as you will get in terms of the selection process. Avoid large unbroken sections of text. Well, I would say avoid large sections of text completely and utterly if you can do that. Make sure you include all your IT skills. So in the GIS sector, people will write down ArcGIS very proudly, or QGIS, or some combination of the two. But there are lots of other tools that we've used that are important. So things like the Google tools, if you've used them, Google Docs and so on. Advanced Excel. Most people have used Excel at one level, but actually very few people use Excel in a sophisticated way. So if you know how to do stats in Excel or pivot tables or any of these sorts of things, you'll make sure you write down advanced Excel, statistics, PowerPoint. A lot of people actually aren't particularly skilled in PowerPoint. So the fact that you can produce good PowerPoint presentations is a skill you should add. Microsoft Access, one of the lesser known, the database component of Microsoft Office, make sure you've included that. Android operating systems, Linux operating systems, all of these sorts of things that you might just kind of take for granted. Make sure you've got them down there, especially if you're more than just a naive user of these things, that you've investigated them, you can do clever things with them. Nick mentioned professional bodies. If you're not a member of professional bodies, join some of them. Often they're free for students. Join, have them down the CV. It shows that you have another string to your bow, that you're interested in professionalism, that you're serious about continuous professional development. So there's the AGI that's been mentioned this morning already, RICS I just mentioned, the Royal Geographical Society, its Chartered Geographer scheme. There's Town Planning Institute, there's British Computer Society, British Cartographic Society, you name it, there's a professional body that will suit you. So join one, join two, that's a good thing to do. And stating the blooming obvious, you trumpet your achievements. If you've done something that you're proud of, or other people tell you that you should be proud of, make sure they're in there. It's very often how we forget these things. We're often, typically British people are very reticent to trumpet their own achievements. I'm afraid if you want a job, you've got to trumpet your achievements in a CV. Other do's, focus on any impact you've made, skills you've developed, what you've achieved. You might struggle to think of these at early career stage. You might think, oh yeah, what have I done? But actually, if you do think about it, you can think of little tasks where you've made a difference. It might be in terms of personal organization. It might be something you've done for your research group. It might be something you've done in terms of group work for an undergraduate project or a master's project. There are small things that actually make a difference. And people, when you're entering a career at your stage, are not looking for, I managed a multinational company. Of course, they're not looking for that. They're looking for possibilities and potential that you can show that you are organized, that you've organized other people, and that you see problems and you solve these problems. That's a really important skill.
And also university societies as well. If you've been involved in the Geography Society, or if you've been at rugby or football or whatever it might be, if you've done something with that, if you've organised things, that can go in as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Use active verbs. So you've adapted, you've influenced, you've innovated. Use positive language. And I have read several CVs in the past where people use very bland language. You need to really push yourself, trumpet yourself. If you're not confident about doing that in person, face to face, you can certainly do it on paper. You don't face the questioning that you will get at an interview when you've done that on paper. You get a positive tone in your CV. Think about your past roles. Include different responsibilities. I was looking at a student CV not very long ago, and it was a whole series of fast food jobs, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, blah, blah, blah. And for every one, they gave exactly the same things. I customer service, I used the till, I handled money, I was on the fish fryer. If you've got a series of very similar roles, introduce different skills and experiences for each of these, or group them together as one set of things, rather than spelling each of them out with exactly the same kind of experiences. So don't just repeat the same thing. Consider all of your experience, not just longer term paid work and degrees. Things like your master's dissertation is experience. It might be something you've done as a short course, or it may be something you did as a summer workshop, or this as the Early Careers Forum on GISRUK is experience. So make sure you record these things in your CV. Remove the ancient. So you probably don't need all your school grades on your CV when you're at the PhD stage. You maybe leave the subjects in there, certainly subjects that are not ones that you studied at university. So you might have a language, or you might have an art subject when you've been doing a geography or environmental science degree at university. So if there are things that indicate breadth, leave them, but otherwise get rid of them. Check for typos and grammar. I would say almost every CV that I look at that students send me have either typographical errors or grammatical errors. And there's nothing that would bias me more looking at somebody for a job than seeing a typo in their CV. I'm immediately, that's major negatives, because if somebody hasn't been careful enough to check and recheck their CV for typos, that kind of tells me something about that person. So check it again, get your friends and family to check it. I've got a friend who keeps updating his CV probably too often. For every job he applies for, he majorly rewrites his CV. And that's a real frustration, because he then doesn't check it for grammar. So I've checked things for grammar for him and typos, fixed them all. He then introduces more errors. And then he said, oh, I've just sent this CV off. And so you've got another typo in there. Oh dear, never mind. So yeah, ask opinions on your CV. You can't have enough opinions. So ask, Nick mentioned your career service. They're very useful. Many universities have very good career services. Ask them. You ask your mum, ask your dad, ask your friends. Ask people who are your peers who are applying for similar jobs, and just make sure that you've honed your CV to be as good as possible. If you're sending it in electronically, which usually is the way that we send these things these days, either downloading them to some online system or emailing them, send it as a PDF, not as a doc, because docs tend to open in a rather rough format. They will often highlight what word thinks are grammatical errors and they're not. So turn it into a nice PDF, and then you can be sure that the format is retained and it looks as beautiful as you intend it to look. GIS specifics, that's particularly what Nick asked me to speak about. So let's take some points here. You'll make sure you include all your skills. It never ceases to amaze me with my students that they will give me a CV and they will have left off skills they gained in various of their courses. It may just be something they did one practical on, or even one part of one practical. But if it's a new bit of software or it's a new skill, write it down. Make sure you've got it in your CV. The number of times I have students say, oh, well, I'm not very confident in that. Doesn't matter, write it down. If it's something that's actually important for that particular role, then mug up on it, study up on it, you revise it, refresh your memory on it, but you need to have it in your CV. So, what GI packages, systems have you ever used? Absolutely every one you can think of, write it down. Programming skills and languages, even languages you only used once, you've got some experience of them, write it down. What database skills? Have you got SQL? Have you got database programming skills, different database management systems, write it down. Web skills, a number of my students who forget to write down HTML, CSS, XML, these are valuable skills as well, so write them down. Links to examples of your own work. You'll put, as I say, the CV is usually an electronic document you're sending in, so you can put hot link in your CV. You can link to your undergraduate dissertation. You can link to your own website. You can link to maps you're particularly proud of, GitHub links. You can even put cartography examples in your CV. If you've got a particularly nice map that you've and you're proud of your cartography and you've got an artistic talent, you put it as an illustration, a background, a little illustration as part of your CV, or link to a gallery of your work that you can build as a website. Conference attending, I mentioned that you're clearly at this forum, but you will attend GISRUK. Make sure that's down there, even if you're not giving a paper. If you're just there networking, enjoying, write that down. At your career stage, that's worth recording. Once you've presented 20, 30 papers, then yeah, leave out the ones that you're just attending and just include the papers themselves, the ones where you're giving papers. But at this stage, write down the fact you've been to a conference. Have you been to any OpenStreetMaps mapping parties? If you haven't, go to one. If you have, make sure it's on your CV because it shows you've got other broader interests in terms of GI. Things not to do, don't have crazydancegirl@hotmail.co.uk is the email address you give. That may be your email address. You probably set it up when you were 15. Change it. Let's have a nice professional one. You can forward everything from Crazy Dance Girl to your new one, but make sure it's the new one you put down your CV. It just looks more professional. And while you're at it, tidy up your social media. If you've got any old social media that you've been posting, stuff you're slightly embarrassed about, guaranteed somebody will Google you and they will find it. So delete it, get rid of it. You don't want to get some awkward question interview about something you posted when you were 16. So dump it. Don't forget training courses you've attended. So it might just be a one-day training course as part of your PhD, part of your master's, might have been something you did voluntarily when you were undergrad. Don't forget it. Think back through time and make sure you've got it on there. In terms of style, don't use underline. Underline is so old-fashioned. Underline was designed in the days of typewriters to indicate bold. So where you underline something with a typewriter, a printer will make that bold. That was the purpose of underlining. Otherwise, underlining just looks really old-fashioned. So don't use underlining on a CV. It just, doesn't work. Also, don't use a tiny font. Oh, I've got so much to say about myself, I've got to reduce it to 6-point font. No. You're saying far too much. Rip out words, make the font bigger. You want to make an impact, and part of making an impact is about size and prominence of your name at the top of the CV, your details, your skills, putting them in a nice box or whatever. Don't randomly change fonts. You can easily use too many fonts. It looks terrible. Only use acronyms where they're well understood. And in terms of dates, chronologically, don't leave gaps. You will have to explain gaps at an interview. Often I see students who will put down exact start dates and exact end dates. You can get away with just putting down a year. And then a gap that's in there that you're slightly embarrassed about because you got fed up with the boss and you resigned and it took you 3 months to get another job, won't even appear. So just put a year down for a particular job and that simplifies that one. Things you don't have to include, certainly in UK and North American CVs, things like sex, gender, marital status, date of birth are not encouraged these days to avoid bias. If you want to put them in, you can put them in. If you think an older date of birth shows age, experience, and maturity, you can put it in, but you don't have to put them in. Generally, you shouldn't include past salaries. That's a bit more of a feature of American CVs. People tend to put salaries in because they're very money-oriented, but generally shouldn't do that in the UK, certainly. References, you can simply say available on request. If you know your references and your referees know that you're applying for jobs, that's fine. But if you're giving your current boss as a referee and he doesn't know that you have applied for another job, it'd be slightly embarrassing if he gets a phone call and he comes to you and says, oh, I didn't realize you were intending on leaving us, especially if you don't get the job when you're not leaving them. So you can do that. People often ask me what sections to have in a CV, so I've kind of highlighted them there. Pretty obvious, most of them. Your name and contact information. Perhaps not so obvious, having some kind of summary statement, some impact statement at the start that says something about you and really bigs you up, blows your trumpet. Skills, but making sure that they meet the mandatory requirements for that particular role. If you're missing a mandatory skill, try and mug up on it so you can at least write down that you know what it is. Because if you completely miss off a mandatory skill, you will probably be put by the recruiter or the HR person on the reject bundle before you even start, no matter how good you are. We used to have terrible problems with students going for jobs in the Scottish Government who are perfectly well qualified, but because there was some mandatory skill like your project management experience, they thought, oh, I haven't got that. They wouldn't write it down and they would end up in the reject bundle. Everybody has project management experience. It might just not be very big projects. So make sure you write it down. Obviously, all your experience, your education, professional memberships we've mentioned, other information achievements, things you're proud of, as Nick said, your hobbies and interests, your outside interests, things that just make you sound a bit more of an interesting person, you can pop in there. Some examples, these are real CVs that I tried to anonymize, so hopefully you won't be able to work out who they are. This one is nicely formatted, name prominently at the top. It's amazing how many people put CV in huge capitals at the top and then their name in tiny letters underneath. It's obvious it's a CV. If it's not obvious, you can put it in small letters. But your name is the thing that needs to be in big letters. Nice sections, clearly laid out, probably a bit wordy. There's quite a lot of words in there. So you think about how to reduce these number of words, but things of note, skills are at the top, are prominent, not quite at the top, the highlights at the top, skills are next. Often people hide skills away down the bottom. I don't know why they do that. Education is pretty prominent. This person has highlighted the fact they've had the best dissertation award. They've put their dissertation title in, which is again something that's often forgotten. Adds a talking point, shows an aspect of your interests. Work experience, possibly a little bit wordy. There's a lot of bullet points under each role here, but you can think about that and again reflecting on different jobs you've had and what these different experiences have brought to you. Another one here, this one's got a photo at the top. Yeah, why not stick a photo of yourself at the top? That's interesting, lets people connect to you. Okay, it gives away certain information you might not want to give away. This one's also got date of birth and nationality and so on. Fine, yeah, if you want to put that on there, great. It's got CV at the top, but it's got the name much more prominently. So it's clear what this is, it's clear who that is. There's a nice personal statement, possibly slightly long, but okay. Good positive words like extensive experience, grounded with in both natural and social sciences. Good words there. Key strengths include thoroughly trained, so lots of positive words, strong interpersonal skills, effective in both supervised and unsupervised group work and working independently. So lots of strong words in there that make the points very clearly. Education, this was one of our master's students a few years ago, is clearly laid out, your bullet points with all the courses they've done. You don't need flowing prose to indicate that. You simply list all of these and that gives a very clear indication of what your skills are from the course titles. Another one here, this one I did just take from the internet, so I presume it's not somebody real, but I wanted one that was just a little bit different, and this is different because it uses graphics, so it's got a little image at the top, but particularly it's highlighted things in this panel on the left-hand side. So you can get some key information from that panel in terms of the computers that person's used, the software they've used, the skills they've got in terms of communications, in terms of management, in terms of languages, both computer languages and spoken languages or written languages, and then the detail is in the broader bit of the CV in terms of when they did particular things, what colleges they went to, and so on. Yeah, use a panel. You put your skills in a panel, put other key information in a panel. That can be a very effective way. Also, a bit of use of color. None of the previous ones really used color beyond possibly the photograph, be a subtle use of color that just makes that CV look a little bit more interesting, a little bit nicer. For academic CVs, I'm not going to go through this list, but these are the sort of additional things that you would expect on an academic CV. There's more detail, and all of these things individually specified. Clearly, at your stage, you're not going to have many of these, but you put on things that you do have. So you might not, as a PhD student, you won't be supervising other PhD students, but you might have been working with or partially supervising master's students or undergraduates. So write that down. If you've got involved on university committees or boards or subject-related things, put that down. You will gain publications as you go through your PhD. Certainly make sure they're in there, and so on and so forth. And be specific. So give details, give numbers. If you've, I added this to my CV not terribly long ago. One of my colleagues said, no, you've supervised so many MSc projects, you should actually not actually even just give a number, but actually give the names of all the students you've supervised, because that would make a big impact. And luckily I was able to reconstruct that list. And also anything you've done that's had an impact. Yeah, you might have appeared on the radio or given a public lecture. If you haven't yet, you probably will later in your career. But smaller things that made an impact. Have you made an impact to your research group by sorting bugs in a model? Have you acquired some data that people didn't know about that's been reused? Have you enabled something in terms of your university, your department, or whatever? So these often quite small things show that you're somebody who's a doer, who takes problems and solves them, which is quite good. And as Nick said, you reflect on your volunteering, your hobbies and interests. You give evidence, and you can use your hobbies and interests in terms of adding to that. So just some examples here. And I think it is worth going through these because they're often unexpected. If you write a blog, you can claim you're a good communicator. If you're at the center of your group of friends, you can claim you've got people skills. If you've ever run an event at school, at university, even a small event, you can claim you're an organizer. You can perhaps claim you can manage budgets. Do you like computer games? In which case you can claim focus, a high degree of focus, dedication. If you've done charity work, if you've supported a friend who's been ill, you can show you're compassionate. If you do quizzes or puzzles or escape rooms, you can show you've got a logical mind. Have you managed your study time effectively? You can say you're organized. Do you play in a sports club? You can claim you're a team player. Have you supervised any activity? And this is a really important one. You probably do have management experience because you've supervised something. It doesn't matter whether it was a group of Cub Scouts or a group project that you find yourself in the management role of. You claim that as management experience. At your stage of career, having these little nuggets is important. So hopefully that slide has kind of made you think about the sorts of things that you might be able to add to your CV to make that a little bit richer. Don't forget short internships, short courses, other experiences. Do you have French, German, Spanish, even if it's bad? Even if you haven't done it since school, if you've got a school certificate in it, write it down your CV. You've got some claim to have some knowledge of it. Driving license. People forget to put driving license down. Actually, that's quite important, because if your employer discovers you can't drive at interview and you need to zip around between multiple sites, that's probably going to make them think you're at a disadvantage, even if you're not at a disadvantage. First aid certificates. Any of these sorts of things. I'm sure there's lots of other things I've forgotten to list there, but just think about the things that you have in your broader life and record these as well. Don't put anything controversial in. So anything political, religious, leave it out. Better not to go there, I think. And that's it. Sorry, I've slightly overrun, Nick, in terms of time, but if there's any questions, if we want to have a brief discussion, very happy to do that. I hope that has been useful to you. As I say, these, I don't know if we're going to put the slides up separately, Nick, but they're certainly in the recording, so you can review these again for some of the points I kind of shot through. So any questions? Silence.
Yeah, do type in the chat or shout out if you've got questions. We can share the slides. I'll liaise with Scott about that and we'll put them up somewhere, but we will do that. I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we'll move straight on. If you do have any, just put them in the chat and we'll pick them up at the end of the session with the panel discussion so we can talk about them then, I think.
Yeah, that's fine. John is making a very good point about a website portfolio gallery. Very much worth doing that. It not only shows you've got web skills, but it highlights the things you've done. We encourage all of our students to do that. So yeah, definitely worth doing.
Great. Okay, so I'm next going to hand over to Tom Perks, who's here to talk about the AGI and specifically the AGI ECR, so the Early Career Researchers Network. So welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Nick. Hi there. Hi, everyone. I'll just share my screen 1 second. Okay, can you guys see that?
We can see it. You're a little bit faint in terms of volume.
Okay, I'll move a bit closer to the microphone. Is that better?
That's better.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. So yeah, hi everyone. My name's Tom Perks, and I'm a AGI Early Careers Network event coordinator. So yeah, I'm here today to give you guys an overview about kind of who we are and what we do. And just to give you a bit of background about myself, I'm an early career professional myself. Been working with GIS for 8 years now within the environmental consultancy sector. And yeah, before that, I did a degree in geography at Southampton University, followed by a master's in geographic information and climate change at Swansea. So what is the ECN? We're a network of early career professionals run by early career professionals. And you can see on the screen there's some of our past and present committee members who are volunteers working in both the public and private sector. And we currently have about 8 members of the committee in various roles, such as event coordinator like myself. We have a chair, social media and publicity officers, and also representatives in Scotland and Wales. And we regularly host events targeted towards early career professionals and students, providing a platform for networking and collaborative working across the geospatial industry. And as a special interest group of the AGI, our mission is to provide support, resources and development opportunities to early career professionals. And that's those with less than 10 years industry experience, and also students that are looking to go into the geospatial industry. So I think the AGI has been mentioned already today, but just to recap, the Association for Geographic Information is a professional membership organisation with the mission of building a thriving UK geospatial community, actively supporting a sustainable future. And with over 1,000 individual and organisation level members, they provide a strong professional network which challenges the future direction of the geographic information industry and supports members with their professional development. So I'm just going to go over a few events that we've hosted in the past year to give you a flavour for what we do at ECN. Over the past year, all of our events have been virtual due to COVID, but this has actually provided us with a new opportunity to reach a wider audience without any geographical barriers. So that's been really good for us. And one of the events we hosted last year in June, we joined forces with the Geovation Hub to discuss geospatial careers with an expert panel from across the industry, exploring the evolution of the industry and the skill requirements, and also with our panelists sharing some insights from their own unique experiences. And we had representatives from various organisations, including KSAT, Ordnance Survey, the Geovation Hub, AGI, and Arcadis. And the recording of the event is on our ECN webpage. So yeah, check it out. And there's some great tips in there. We also teamed up with the Royal Geographic Society with the Institute of British Geographers and delivered a webinar focused on how continued professional development can drive career development and progression. And the RGS delivered a presentation on their Chartered Geographer accreditation. We also had breakout groups where the audience discussed their experiences with CPD shared hints and tips. We try and make our virtual events as interactive as possible, and provide opportunities for networking within the events. We also followed up with a blog article with top tips for making the most of CPD, which is available on our webpage as well. And recently, in January and February this year, we hosted a series of webinars focused on recruitment in the geospatial industry. And the first one was focused on tips for climbing the geospatial jobs ladder. And we had a keynote from John Graham, who's a recruiter in the industry. And he shared lots of tips and experiences. We also had breakout discussions within Zoom, focused on 4 topics, including LinkedIn profiles, making the most of networking, interview techniques, and CV writing. And following the first event, we also had 2 panel discussions. One focused on recruitment in the public sector, and the other on the private sector. So you can see on the screen there, we had quite a diverse range of organisations. And it was really interesting to explore the similarities and differences between the 2 sectors. And it was clear that there are fantastic opportunities for developing a geospatial career in both. So in terms of future events and activities from ECN, we're looking at having some informal networking events later on this year, and having them as kind of spin-offs from some of the main conferences, such as the ESRI annual conference, which is going to be virtual in June, and also the flagship AGI conference, GeoCom, later in the year as well. So it's a great opportunity to meet others, either looking to get into the geospatial industry or those with experience in the industry, and just sharing experience and hints and tips, and just building a network which can be really beneficial, especially during the early stages of your career. We're also looking at hosting an event focused on diversity in the geospatial industry, and also we're looking at starting a pilot mentoring scheme as well, to support our members. So the AGI membership options have recently been relaunched, and there's now a new network membership option which is free, which provides loads of benefits. There's also the professional membership option, which also has some additional benefits, such as the access to the AGI members list and discounts to AGI events. So it would be great if you're interested in coming along to some ECN events or volunteering on our committee. Please do email us at ecn@agi.org.uk. We've also got a presence on Twitter, and AGI have a LinkedIn page which we feature on regularly as well. So you could give them a follow.
Great.
Yeah, and yeah, by all means, check out our website. We've got some great content on there from our events this year, and we also have a monthly or quarterly newsletter. So if you join our mailing list, you'll be sure to receive that and keep up to date with what we're up to in future events. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Tom. That was a great overview of AGI and ECR. So please do feel free to share those contact details in the chat. If you just paste them in there, we've been getting everyone to do that. I will kind of just move on now to the next chunk, just to kind of highlight what we're doing for the main panel discussion session. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, we're having a careers, well, I call it careers panel. I don't know if that's the best name for it, but we've got 5 volunteers who've offered to tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do. So we're kind of they've got 10 minutes each, so they'll tell us who they are, who they work for, what they do, and kind of their experiences. So something about their career, how they worked with GIS to get where they are. I've left it fairly open, so it's entirely up to them what they want to say. We'll have plenty of opportunity for questions, and I think it would probably make sense to do the presentations first and then do all the questions at the end. So if you do have a question, do please put it in the chat, and then we'll have a discussion kind of towards the end of the session. Great. So first up is going to be Sam Jones. So I will stop that and pass over to Sam, who works for Senedd Cymru, the Welsh Parliament. And I've probably got the pronunciation completely wrong, so apologies for that.
No, it's very close. It's very close. Senedd Cymru, you would say, but very close. Thanks, Nick. I'll just share my screen a second, if you remember to do it. I've lost some. So hopefully you can see something.
Yeah, we can.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so as Nick said, my name's Sam Jones, and I've just been asked to come and tell you a little bit about my experience using GIS with a public sector organisation in Wales. So I suppose I should start off really by just saying that my time is split actually between two organisations. So my main job, if you like, is with Cardiff University, and I'm based in the School of Social Sciences there and work for WISERD, which is the Wales Institute of Social, Economic Research and Data, which is why we call it WISERD. It's a bit of a mouthful to say the rest of it. And this accounts for 3 days of my week working in the School of Social Sciences in that research organisation. And it's a professional services role, and it's mainly data related, so managing, curating and presenting research data from social sciences. So that's 3 days of my week, as I said. And then the other 2 days of my week, I work as a GIS specialist in the research service in Senedd Cymru, or Welsh Parliament. And it's that role that I just want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about today. So we'll cover what the Senedd is and what it does, along with how we use geographical information and GIS to support our work. And we'll come to that a little bit later, but I just thought I'd start off with just giving just a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about my career path and how I got to where I am at the moment. So just a little bit of background. I'm a geographer by background, so I've got an undergraduate degree in geography from Cardiff University, from the School of Earth and Ocean Sciences there. And this is mainly, as the school name suggests, it's mainly focused on physical geography, and it was mainly focused on geography from a marine perspective. And I'm ashamed to admit that I'd never heard of GIS until I started doing my degree. I'd always enjoyed doing geography and computer sciencey type subjects in school before I went to university. So programming, database development, web development, that sort of thing. And it made choosing between geography and computer science quite difficult when I was looking at university courses, because it seemed quite unlikely that there'd be a subject that combined both. So I went on and then decided to undertake a geography degree, and then encountered GIS during my undergraduate, and it was quite an exciting moment really to discover that there's a subject that combined elements of both disciplines. So I could do programming and databases and things like that, whilst also being able to do geographic analysis and spatial stuff. So after graduating, I got my job with WISERD at Cardiff Uni as a data technician. And again, that mainly focused on IT related tasks, so data management, database development, web development, that sort of thing. But it also gave me a chance to work on some research projects with geographers from Cardiff and from the University of South Wales, which gave me a chance to build up or build upon the GIS skills I learned during my undergraduate degree. And then WISERD also gave me the opportunity to develop these skills further and encouraged me to embark on a master's degree. So I obtained an MSc in GIS from Leeds via distance learning whilst employed at Cardiff. And then while I was doing my master's degree, I was approached with an opportunity to be seconded to the research service within the Senedd just on a part-time basis for a couple of days a week. And they were specifically looking for somebody who had a specialism in GIS, someone with a background and skills in GIS to help them develop their use of geographic information GIS within the Senedd as an organisation. And I didn't have that much experience, but it was a great opportunity to use and further develop the skills I'd obtained during my degrees and working with WISERD as well. So, and that was obviously, that's using GIS in a more applied way than perhaps I would have used it before. So it was a good opportunity. So that's quite a few years ago now. And I've had the opportunity to work with both organisations ever since then, over the last 6 or 7 years. And the roles developed really more into a sort of a knowledge exchange role between both organisations with a geographic focus or GIS focus. So that's just a little bit of background about my career and how I've got to where I've got to. I appreciate you won't all be familiar with the Senedd and its role, so I just thought I'd say a little bit about that before telling you about how we use GIS and geographic information within the organisation. So the Senedd itself is the full name is Senedd Cymru or Welsh Parliament. It's a public sector organisation in Wales. It often gets confused with the Welsh Government, but they're actually two completely separate organisations with different remits. So for those familiar with how the UK government's set up, the difference between the Welsh Government and the Senedd is quite similar to the difference between Whitehall, which includes all the UK government departments, and the House of Commons. So the Welsh Government houses the Welsh ministers and the Welsh Cabinet, and has the responsibility of tabling or proposing and implementing policy in devolved subject areas such as education, health, that sort of thing. Much like Whitehall has those responsibilities in the UK government, whereas the Senedd has a similar function to the House of Commons and has the responsibility of representing the people of Wales, making the laws for Wales, agreeing taxes, and generally scrutinising the work done by the Welsh Government and holding them to account to ensure that the decisions that they're making are actually in the best interests of the people of Wales. So that's sort of the difference between the two organisations. So the Senedd, much like the House of Commons, is made up of democratically elected members, so we call them members of the Senedd, whose roles are similar to members of Parliament in the House of Commons. And there's 60 of these members in the Senedd, and they're involved in committees which are responsible for scrutinising legislation and undertaking independent inquiries into different aspects of devolved subjects in Wales. And they're also, obviously, they're also responsible for representing constituents in various constituencies and regions throughout Wales. So my role in the Senedd is based in the Senedd Research Service, and our team, which is about 40 people, have the responsibility of providing members of the Senedd with the information they need to undertake their roles in terms of government scrutiny and representing their constituents. And there's three main ways that we do this, and I'll just touch on these now with really what we do in terms of a GIS perspective, geographic perspective. So the three main ways that the Senedd Research Service support members, members of the Senedd, are either through their direct inquiries, through committee inquiries, or through proactive outputs like writing blog posts. So the most common method is responding to members' inquiries, which are either made directly by the member themselves or by their support staff. And their remit can be quite broad. So if you think of all the potential issues a constituent can bring to them, this can cover a wide variety of topics and subject areas. And normally they're quite topical issues that are brought up because that's generally what the constituent is interested in at the times, things that are topical. So just working through some GIS examples of what we do in terms of inquiry responses. These can vary in complexity. So sometimes they're quite simple requests, like can you produce a map of the electoral wards in a certain constituency? So this one happens to be Cardiff Central constituency. Or it might be something like, can you show us how Welsh language ability varies across Wales? Or where are the static libraries in Brecon and Radnorshire constituency? Or something like, how does air quality vary across Wales? it's all quite broad and quite varied, and it's quite straightforward to create those maps and show those patterns. Or perhaps they might be more complex areas which require a little bit more processing, a little bit more analysis. So, for instance, we did a little bit of work. I'm sorry, the slides aren't changing for me. So that was the constituency example, the Welsh language example, the libraries example, and the air quality example. So the more examples of more advanced data processing and analysis.
Sorry to interrupt, Sam, just to say you've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So this one is on travel time. So we looked at, there was an inquiry into 3 possible new hospital locations in Wales. So we looked at the different impacts of the population by the various different locations of these hospitals, and how it would, different locations would impact different population groups. Or we looked at energy certificates of properties in different wards in Cardiff, which sounds quite straightforward, but the housing communities and local government data with energy certificates doesn't have any location coordinates on it, so we had to match those up to the address-based data set from Ordnance Survey using address strings. Or we had an inquiry about the proportion of people who are only in Wales who are only served by a FACE score. And there's an inquiry about whether how many people only could have access to a FACE score. So that involves some road network analysis and creation of service areas to look at what was that actually true, and were there a lot of people in Wales who only had access to a FACE score. Just to quickly cover, as we are running out of time, some of the committee inquiries. So these are actually inquiries that are undertaken by a committee rather than a member themselves. So that we did looked at one that showed the variation in childcare provision across Wales, supporting some research in academic from Bangor University. We looked at some variations in banking provision in Wales, which was then taken on by some academics from University of South Wales, but these are just travel time from different banks. We looked at the change over time and how that affected the different segments of the population in Wales by the reduction in banking services. As I said, we also produced blog posts. So this was one on leasehold properties in Wales, where there was a higher proportion of leasehold properties being sold, which was a bit of an issue in Wales a few years ago because a lot of the new developments were leasehold rather than freehold. And then obviously the more recent COVID-19 analyses that have been done have been fairly prevalent and important in understanding the spread of the virus. In addition to this, just this final slide.
Sorry, Sam, are you all right to wrap up in the next slide or so?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks.
So in addition to this, we also support the corporate use of GIS within the organisation. So this is just an example of some of the data we provide that sits behind the postcode lookup on the website. So there's a postcode lookup that allows members of the public to find their local member of the Senedd. So we provide the data for that. And we also do some analysis internally to support decision making using geographic information. So that's just a quick overview of the work that we do in the Senedd, my journey to get there, my career path to get there, and then some of the work we do in supporting members of the Senedd in their scrutiny of decisions made by the Welsh Government and in their representation of the people of Wales. So thanks for listening. Sorry to go a couple of minutes over, Nick.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. That's great. Now I'm going to pass over to Charles Thompson, who's from Corrivate. So hand over to you, Charles.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I am afraid I don't have slides, but I might show something to kind of help explain what I do. I'm the product manager for Corrivate, and generally product management is sort of a bridging role, if we can think of it that way, between technical development and the commercial activities of a company. And so I sit sort of between both worlds of customer needs and guiding the technical development to sort of service those customer needs. I work for a company called Corrivate, and so we are a sort of unofficial spin out of UCL, actually. So I sort of fell into this in a kind of interesting way. So I had done my undergrad as a sort of undergraduate master's. So you do 4 years and you get a master's rather than a bachelor's. And I'd gone off into industry. I'd been a land surveyor. Unfortunately, that was in the financial crisis, so I had great timing in that sense, as I think a lot of my cohort did. And so it was a bit of a rough industry to go into because it was heavily reliant on the property industry, especially retail, real estate, commercial real estate, to drive the revenue of that market. And so the sort of bottom dropped out of that market over the financial crisis because banks just got very concerned about all of their property and didn't want to spend money on anything. So I came back into academia actually, and I did a PhD, sort of a port in a storm in a way, because after vowing never to do a PhD, I came back and did one. And I have to admit, it was very rewarding, and it was always in an area I was very interested in. So I started off in the civil, environmental and geomatic engineering department at UCL, and which was quite nice because it, as its name suggests, it's rather a mishmash of disciplines. And so that's quite nice in a way, because it sort of, there's more application to it. And I think that certainly helps a lot in terms of the later things that I went on to do, and ultimately into this startup where you're kind of doing a lot of things and have to be used to wearing several hats at once. So it was an interesting period. And so I did my PhD, which was very much involved in, not so much, I wouldn't say GIS as such, but geospatial more broadly, I think. So I was very involved in point cloud data capture and the processing of point cloud data mainly from LiDAR, but some photogrammetry, but mainly LiDAR processing. And from that processing and a sort of automated modeling, I came to the end of my PhD, and I wasn't sure which direction I wanted to particularly go in. There was obviously the routes that Nick talked about at the beginning about going into academia or going back into the sort of commercial side of things. And I tried looking for funding to stay in academia. My PhD supervisor was quite keen for me to stay on and do some research, but the sort of pots of money we were looking for didn't really come through, and that didn't really work out. But alongside that, an academic I did know quite well in electronic and electrical engineering, I guess I was picking UCL departments with the longest names, was seeing if he could spin out a company. He'd done a piece of research that he'd taken to the enterprise part of UCL, and he was looking at, could he commercialize this work he'd done as part of a different research project that he'd been doing that was backed by some Innovate UK funding, which is sort of governmental backed funding. And that came through, and so I moved across to his group. And originally as a developer, I was originally supposed to be carrying on the research because he'd lost his development team because he'd run out of funding to fund them. And I was supposed to be continuing that development work. What I ended up doing was a lot of commercialization work that had nothing to do with development whatsoever. And so because I knew the market that the product was going into, so because I'd been a surveyor, I knew the geospatial market that their technology that he'd been developing would be going into. The majority of my work as part of his group was to work out how to commercialize it, and doing a lot of the market research and the product placement and what this thing would actually look like and how we could take it to market. And I did that in partnership with himself and the sort of commercial advisor who he had, who eventually became the CEO of the spin-out I now work for, which is Geographic. And we did that. And so we launched that company in 2017. We started off in UCL's startup space and then kind of moved out into our own premises. And we developed point cloud processing software. We started off in the desktop as a sort of as a proof of concept, and then we have latterly, certainly in 2019, we took that to the cloud, and we became we're not strictly software as a service, but it's a useful way to understand what we do. So software, we provide software through the internet, basically. And this is quite a game-changing thing to do for point cloud processing. It's quite heavy data. We can leverage a lot of the benefits from the cloud by doing it this way. And so that gives us our edge in the market. In terms of myself and my job, product manager is a bit of a jack of all trades. You sort of start filling in roles, especially in a company as small as ours, where maybe 15 people in total as a start, as it was still fairly small. And so it means I'm kind of doing all sorts of things. So I'm talking to customers to aid those. I'm fulfilling the product owner role in Scrum, if you know the sort of more sort of development process of Scrum, where that role defines sort of the priority of things that the developers work on. So I do that. I guide UX UI work. I provide input into the research elements, the R&D work that we do within the company. And it's quite varied, and as you would expect in a startup, there's a lot of spinning plates to stop them crashing to the ground, sort of thing. To keep using metaphors, but it's exciting and it's quite an interesting thing. And I think to be honest, a lot of the way I worked as a PhD and as a very short period in doing sort of postdoc-y type research fitted quite well. I think it's probably not something that one admits to, but is fairly prevalent, is the sort of insecurity of life in that end of the academic spectrum is not so dissimilar from being in a startup where you're kind of always raising money and looking for how you sort of survive kind of thing and get to a point where you can stabilize the company. And I think a lot of the skills in terms of presentation and in terms of knowledge that you pick up and working quickly through problems is very beneficial to a startup, especially, and this, I think, served me quite well in that process. Yeah, I think more generally, I think the geospatial background that I have, especially from my first degree, my postgraduate master's, which did have quite a big GIS component, but also various geospatial technologies. It was a very broad undergraduate degree that sadly no longer exists at UCL, but was a very broad platform of across the whole suite of different geospatial technologies, from GPS all the way down to GIS and LiDAR, 3D capture, data capture and photogrammetry, and a lot of the fundamentals of it. And I think that skill is very important because it's such an important part of what we do, because we're taking in geospatial data to process from various different sources. We're having to handle that. And although we have a lot of software developers who are very smart people, and they're very good at the majority of things, actually having the specific skills to understand what the data means and why you need to process things in certain ways, what the problems are, why geospatial coordinate systems are important, and how that all transitions. I mean, you wouldn't believe the amount of time we spend on transformation matrices. I mean, I think I spent 90% of my life tearing my hair out about transformation matrices and various matrix algebra going wrong. And a lot of that, obviously, you need to know what you're doing. And actually, the geospatial skill is, although it's used in our daily lives a lot, Google Maps, etc., it's actually not a skill you find a lot in the jobs market. And especially for a startup, you can get developers of various degrees, but it's quite hard to get, say, developers with geospatial experience. That's a sort of diamond in the rough to try and find that. So they are valuable skills, and they're important in a lot of things that underpin quite valuable services. A lot of the services we provide to quite big corporations, large multinational mining corporations, for example. And so it's valuable to us, and then it's valuable to our clients who are also, bigger players than we are as a small minnow trying to service the sort of big whales, as it were.
Great. Oh, thank you very much, Charles. No, that was really interesting. Thanks a lot for that.
No problem.
Yeah, and a really key point about the geospatial skills and how they're useful across the board. It would be great if we could have people's videos on for everybody listening. It's nice to see someone at the other end. So if you are in a position to have your video on, then please do. As before, we'll do questions at the end. So if you do have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll put them up in the discussion afterwards. Next up is Christopher Everingild from Ricardo. So Christopher, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thanks, Nick. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So yes, I'm Christopher Evangelidis. I'm a GIS consultant at Ricardo, more specifically within the air quality and emission inventories teams. and we are environmental consultants. So we compile the National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory for the UK government, which is the reference standard for both greenhouse gases and air quality pollutants emissions in the UK. And more importantly, the NAI is used for underpinning policy change, and it is used for international submissions. Other projects we work on include net zero projects, or climate emergencies, which is the new trend nowadays by various local authorities and city councils in the UK, where we spatially disaggregate emissions and utilize scenario modeling techniques to forecast emissions up to 2050. But more importantly, I'm here to tell you about my journey to becoming a GIS professional. A bit of background. I have an environmental science and physical geography degree from Keele University, where I learned a lot about our world and the various ecosystems we live in, but I also explored a variety of environmental applications of GIS, from surface water modeling to creating online apps for environmental impact assessments. But what was the most beneficial aspect as an undergrad was learning about remote sensing. And in the course of the last year, a year and a half, when I started looking into my dissertation, I developed a fervency in the remote sensing techniques, and specifically in the utilization of satellite imagery for the analysis of post-fire revegetation dynamics. So using multispectral data to examine on a monthly basis how the land revegetated, regenerated, if you prefer, after the big fire event. So in conjunction with this elevation data, I was able to understand how the area revegetated 2 years after the event. Regarding that, I truly believe if something interests you and you have a passion for it, you should, give it all. And what I mean by that is attend conferences like this one, meet people who share the same interest, and even contact, for example, authors of papers, and they tend to be more responsive than you may think. So yeah, I think it's important to create your network and learn from each other. So after my undergrad, I pursued a master's degree in geospatial sciences at UCL, as I wanted to explore more what's behind those, fancy buttons in the GIS software and the various job processing tools that they have. So going behind the scenes, at UCL, I learned how to code, admittedly for the very first time about 2.5 years ago. And I think that's fundamental as a GIS professional. So specifically, I learned how to code in R for data visualization and manipulation, including forecasting of traffic. Learned how to code in Python for spatial analysis. In a way, you can think of it in a way that's more, more in-depth functions than the common GIS, whether that's ArcMap or QGIS. And SQL and Postgres server for efficient big spatial data handling. So for my master's dissertation, I collaborated with an industrial partner, WSP in the UK. And for that project, I used GIS techniques in conjunction with space syntax, which is a slightly different approach, more of an architectural approach of visualizing space in order to understand pedestrian movement in London and promote walking in the capital. So yes, and that's it. And it's been since September 2019, just after my master's, I started working in Ricardo. It's been great, and without sounding what's the word? Without sounding to the point, but what I've learned that at UCL, I'm applying on my day-to-day job at Ricardo. So yes, it's been a great journey so far. And yeah, if you would like to learn more about the technical work we do here, join myself and my colleague Ioannis Tsagadakis at the ESRI annual conference in June on the analytical track. Yeah, and if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box below, and I'm happy to answer them later on.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that, Christopher. No, that
welcome. Thank you.
It's great to hear your journey, and there's always kind of so many different bits to everybody's journey. If you do want to post the link to the ESRI session you mentioned in the chat, feel free. And if you want to post contact details and so on, please do as well. That goes for everyone. As before, we'll do questions at the end. Next up, we've got Paul Monday.
Hey Nick, hey everyone. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Can you see that?
We can, yeah. Correct.
Great. So, excuse me. Hi everyone. I'm Paul Monday. I work for a company called S&P Global Ratings, which is the world's largest independent credit rating agency. I have a background in GIS, but also in kind of climate change adaptation and resilience. And I think it's fair to say that I've kind of dipped in and out of GIS over the years, but it's always been kind of a key tool in my armory, and continues to be so. So I've just got a few slides on my kind of career path, and then a little bit about the work I do, and I think there's some time for questions at the end of the group. So let me just move this out of the way because I think that you're probably seeing that. So in terms of my my career path, so I did a PhD at the UEA Norwich, essentially built a land use model in GIS in Idrisy. Many of you may be familiar with Idrisy, kind of a raster-based GIS, and then did a short postdoc afterwards, about 6 months or so. So nothing to kind of write home about. But really, like some of the other speakers have mentioned previously, I think I kind of got a little bit cognizant that about the lack of kind of job security in that space, and actually more so, I was kind of getting quite aware that I wanted to have like an impact on the ground rather than kind of talking hypothetically to an extent. So I wanted to kind of move into into kind of consultancy and try and drive kind of change on the ground. So that's when I moved to land use consultants. So I finished my PhD in 2010, stayed at land use consultants for a year, and effectively there I was a GIS consultant. So I was working on kind of land management, planning type projects, as well as kind of coming up with methodologies and approaches to kind of identify areas for particular sites, multi-criteria analysis type stuff, effectively producing maps, visualizations for renewable schemes like wind farms in ArcScene and in Google Earth and those sorts of things as well. And then it kind of dawned on me quickly, and maybe you guys aren't the right audience to talk to you about this, but I kind of felt that I was a bit pigeonholed in my role, and that my broader PhD did actually give me a far number kind of skills. So I wanted to kind of use those. So I moved to Atkins, a large kind of engineering consultancy, where I joined as an adaptation and resilience consultant, a specialist in climate change, effectively. And I stayed there for about 6 years or so, kind of moving up to a senior consultant role. And effectively what I did there was actually similar to my role at WSP, where I worked with companies, whether they were NGOs, government departments, infrastructure managers, owners, etc., to understand how climate change may impact them, their customers, their businesses, their supply chains, and then worked with the engineering teams and also members of my own team to to understand the types of kind of measures that could be used to mitigate those types of impacts, and then usually wrap that up into a strategy or an action plan to deliver change over time. So I then kind of, I was doing quite a bit of GIS in Atkins, and of course at Land Use Consultants as well. I was doing kind of projects focused on biodiversity, with water companies, with Highways England, and internationally with some of the multilateral development banks as well, to try and bring some clarity around climate risks and how they may impact those organisations. I then moved to WSP to kind of set up my kind of own team, as it were, with a focus on adaptation and resilience, and again did much of the same sort of thing as I did in Atkins, using GIS, but I guess more in a kind of an indirect way, in the sense that many kind of members of the team were doing the analysis kind of for me, and then I was interpreting the results and then acting in a kind of strategic role, as it were. And then after I started working a lot with investors and in financial services, and at the end, towards my end of the time at WSP, and I was there for a couple of years, and this role at S&P Global Ratings came up, and I moved across about a year ago, and I've got the next slide kind of essentially describes what I do at S&P Global Ratings. So that's been my kind of career journey in a short postdoc, and then moving into consultancy, and then finally kind of financial services. I should also say there's a sentence at the bottom here that I did a piece with the British Academy about a year or so ago, and it was focused upon people with PhDs and kind of what they've gone into in their career journeys, and of course that may be of interest, so do look that up. It's as simple as kind of Googling the British Academy and my name, I think. So in terms of what I do, there's a lot of text here, but suffice to say, I do some quite interesting stuff. Well, in my opinion, I do. I do applied research. So I use the data, and I use and I leverage the experience of my colleagues and their expertise to try and come up with new research, interesting research that is of interest to the financial markets. So I've published a number of commentaries, as we call them, that leverage outputs from climate models, effectively, that have been themselves generated through kind of GIS and manipulated in that way as well, to try and bring clarity on the kind of credit risks from climate change, and those are focused upon the US public finance market, global airports, which of course, if you've got an airport that's at the coast that may be exposed to sea level rise and flooding, of course that could affect your the revenue that you take in terms of the number of people that you can carry. There may be an impact upon damage to assets and infrastructure, etc., etc. So that's kind of the core part of my role, is that applied research role, trying to bring clarity to some of these issues, and making sure that we incorporate as best we can those views into our credit opinions as well. So I kind of coordinate that aspect of the research and lead on that, and then I also undertake kind of reviews and opinions on kind of financing frameworks and what have you. And I won't go into those because they're not related to GIS, but that just gives you a bit of a sense about the role. And the last point really is just picking up on the fact that, as I mentioned earlier in my first slide, that I don't necessarily use GIS as a kind of core component of my work anymore. I think it's kind of moved on, but it's certainly a useful tool, a very, very valuable tool in my tool set, my skill set, and I rely heavily on it. And also in my role at S&P Global Ratings as well, since moving across, principally because it allows us to develop better insights, have greater foresight about some of these risks, and enable us to ask better questions of some of the entities that we rate on a credit basis. So it's a really useful tool in that sense. So I've just got a few slides on just to bring some of this kind of to life as well. So I mentioned I've had kind of three articles, 3 commentaries, and the links are below. I won't go into kind of detail on them in this slide, but I've got a few slides that kind of show you some of the maps, and it's a bit more visual and a bit more interesting. So the point of using this data is to try and bring kind of clarity to some of these risks. It improves transparency about how we're thinking about some of these issues in terms of how we consider them in our rating opinions, and supports kind of better analysis effectively. So this is one of the papers on physical climate risks in the US public finance space. So clearly, if you've in the US, or anywhere, if you own infrastructure, if you own hospitals, schools, whatever it might be, and they're getting battered by hurricanes, by extreme temperatures, by flooding, etc., then of course or indeed water stress, as per this example, there could be a material impact in terms of your ability to repay debt. And this is just one example of one hazard that we looked at in this study, and it's drawing on GIS data, so outputs and climate models that have been normalized and processed against this kind of 1 to 100 score scale. 100 is bad, by the way, so dark green is bad. And using GIS in this sense has allowed us to try and understand where those kind of greater exposures to water stress may be. And from a county perspective, that might mean that you need to draw more water, import more water from another county that perhaps has an excess, which of course is going to cost you more money, which may affect your credit worthiness as well. And we found a number of kind of impacts and exposures, patterns of exposure through using GIS in this way. So that's one paper. Another one, less visual here, but suffice to say, this is looking at kind of global airports. And I gave an example earlier from a credit perspective, but effectively looked at kind of major airports globally and tried to kind of understand how different climate hazards like flooding, heat waves, wildfire, which of course we've seen quite a lot of in parts of North America, may impact different airports across the world, and looked from a credit perspective about what some of those implications may be. And GIS was core and central to that analysis. We couldn't do the analysis without GIS. So whilst we've just got kind of tabular data here, there were some underlying maps which ultimately weren't published because it was better to show in a table, but effectively, GIS was central to that understanding. So here the table just shows the kind of most exposed airports to changes in kind of heat waves over time, and you can see in this column the kind of change in heat wave days, and that effectively says in the Philippines we could see an extra 3 months or so of heat waves, which is quite impactful if you own an airport, not least because you can't have as many people on the plane because you have weight restrictions that are applied, which of course may impact your revenue and what have you. So that was another example. And then I think I've got one more possibly. This is on CMBS, so commercial mortgage-backed securities, so effectively kind of commercial properties, again, GIS was absolutely kind of central to try and understand how different types of climate hazards may impact these different properties, over time and geographically as well, and under different climate scenarios. And this particular map is showing kind of wildfire exposure, which of course we know the kind of western US states have been absolutely battered by wildfire in the last decade or so, and continue to be. And again, this analysis was kind of key to helping us understand which areas may be at most significant risk, but also more importantly those that are kind of emerging as well, because it's often the case that you're aware of those kind of red flag risks, but those that are emerging are perhaps lower down on the agenda, or you're not aware of them. So this is just another example. And I think I've got a GIF that animates. So this is for the same study, just cycling through each of the different climate hazards, and you can just see those kind of varying patterns of exposure. And what the scores mean effectively is anything over 70 out of 100 is high exposure, is bad. And I've also highlighted the maximum scores of 100 just to also highlight those. I think that might be my last slide. Oh no, I've got one more.
Paul, I was just going to say you've got a minute left. So
oh, fine. Well, this will be really quick. So this is really quick. So this was also using GIS to kind of understand the impact of kind of water availability to water utilities, and this kind of all-in coverage ratio is effectively your spare cash. So a strong kind of all-in coverage ratio it tends to be considered as an important driver of the financial profile, which is indicative of kind of a stronger credit quality. So here, using GIS, we're able to, and satellite data, we're able to identify stronger areas of kind of higher all-in coverage ratios, and how they kind of coexisted with different patterns of land use change. And effectively, we saw that the stronger kind of all-in coverage ratios, where you've got kind of more flexible budgets in areas with kind of evergreen forests and kind of ready access to water, which may be coincidental, but it allowed us to kind of make those inferences and to ask more questions. So there's a paper on this. There's a link at the bottom of the screen and all of these papers as well. So if you want to have a look at them, then you're very welcome. And I welcome any questions a bit later.
Great. Oh, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, and if you're willing to share your contact details or details, links and that sort of thing, please do post them in the chat.
I should say, Nick, I can't access the chat because my organisation doesn't allow me access to it, so I'll have to get you to share those via email or something.
Yeah, we can do that, and we can post stuff online afterwards as well. Cool. And finally, I'd like to hand over to Jo Wilkin from UCL.
Hi, thank you. I'm trying to not look like a crazy cat lady right now, but I know of my cat, she's quite persistent in that if she doesn't sit here, she will come back. So hopefully none of you are too scared of them. I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen. I think I'm taking a bit of a different tact with this compared to the others. So bear me a second.
Yeah, no, there was no specific going to everyone, so everyone's done something slightly different, but that's good. Variety is good.
Okay. It doesn't seem to be working so well. Oh, open system preferences. Sorry, I might just not. If you just bear with it. Oh, that one's an easy one to change. Oh no, sorry, apologies. All right, so you're not getting slides because obviously Mac OS will not let me show you any slides. Anyway, so what I was going to talk about is actually building an academic career within where I am, which is spatial data science. So a few of you might be familiar with me, but if not, my name's Dr. Jo Wilkin, and I am a lecturer in social and geographic data science at UCL. So obviously that's where Nick found me. And essentially, what do I currently do with GIS? Well, my long-term career and application of GIS has always been about how can we use spatial analysis and data sets within sustainable development applications. And this sort of real passion for mine actually came during my undergraduate career when I, my dissertation, I was doing what I thought was a qualitative dissertation in Bangladesh about microfinance, and realized ultimately I was trying to actually do a quantitative dissertation, collecting lots of spatial data of which I had zero skills or knowledge to know how to map this. And as a result, I realized that mapping skills and spatial analysis were really going to be an essential tool and skill set in sustainable development and humanitarian applications. And that was really a driver for the last basically 10 years of my career, is how can I develop my skill set to provide these skills within this sector. I very much realized after going to a careers fair in my third year that they basically, in a sustainable development careers fair, they said, "Are you a doctor?" I said, "No." They said, "Okay, well, you don't have any skills that we can use." So that was my main motivation. I was like, well, I'm going to go and learn how to do GIS. And that's where I started and followed through the MSc. And basically, I haven't had quite the direct career path to my position now as a lecturer, as some might think. So one of the first things I'm going to say is that I am the first person in my university to attend, the first person in my family to attend university in my entirety of my mum's side of immediate family, and pretty much only the second cousin to ever attend university on my dad's side, let alone end up with a PhD. So I literally did not know that I could become an academic as a career path until I started my PhD, which is probably like the most counter motivation to many people who start a PhD, who think I'm doing it to become a lecturer. And personally, I started my PhD to learn skills. I wanted to be able to have that time to basically develop skills that I knew were going to become essential in my future career. During my MSc, which was a specialization in geographical information management at a very, very small university that some people have heard of and some haven't, called Cranfield, I very much focused on learning spatial GIS, desktop GIS, some basic HTML, some databasing, but pretty much zero programming. And when I came out of that MSc, I started working as a consultant in oil spill response, of all things to do. That again, my slides would have helped explain this a little bit better. But basically, after finishing my MSc, I knew that programming and learning how to do large-scale spatial analysis was going to be an essential skill set for my future career. And that's what the motivation was for my PhD per se, not actually doing research to get the PhD to then become a lecturer. So if I just rewind a little second, which is that basically prior to my PhD, I was very happy in industry. I came out of my undergraduate and I didn't quite have a direct career path into academia. I came out of my undergraduate with no job, just plans to travel, and that didn't work out too well because obviously I quickly ran out of money. So luckily I'd worked in luckily Southampton, which is where I'm from, is a city which has some very, very interesting niche industries. And I ended up being a temping assistant at a little company called Oil Spill Response, which is based in Southampton because of its access basically to the waters. And that was one of the best things I ever did, because after 3 weeks there, I wormed my way into their technical development group and ended up doing a 6-month internship with them, learning lots to do about the applications of remote sensing in oil spill response. And this was in 2012, 2013, so only a couple of years just after Deepwater Horizon. And it was a very interesting time to be in that industry because they were realizing the utility of remote sensing and GIS and spatial analysis for basically improving response. So I spent some time there. I was very fortunate to spend 6 months at Ordnance Survey as doing sort of consultancy project as well. And then after my MSc, I ended up back in oil spill response, and I actually ended up doing nothing to do with GIS and spatial analysis. I was doing a lot of project management and project coordination, but I was actually a consultant and it gave me a bit of spare time. So I actually managed to spend some time volunteering at the British Red Cross and MSF UK in their GIS teams, because I always wanted to come back to this idea that I was going to end up using spatial analysis and GIS within sustainable development. And basically, because I knew the career that I was having at that time wasn't leading me in that way, I looked to find opportunities that would help. And also, fortunately, within that first 6 months, I managed to get my PhD program secured at the University of Southampton in the World Pop Research Group, which was, for me, the sort of epitome of how can you use research, spatial analysis, large-scale data sets for sustainable development. But in between all these moments before I started my PhD, like I said, I worked in some very niche industries. I've worked in lettings in Southampton. I know the lettings market very, very well in Southampton. I worked at the Festival of Speed, which is a car festival, perfecting my coffee making skills. And like I said, I worked as an admin assistant at Oil Spill Response, which led to that first internship. So none of my career path was undergraduate, master's, PhD, lectureship. There was always things happening in between that meant it wasn't direct. But what I will say is that at each point, there was a part that really built skill sets. And if you ever come and talk to me about what I prioritize when it comes to careers and what my recommendations are for anyone, is always thinking about the skills that are going to help you build your career. And it really has been, for me, the driver of my career. Whether that was starting by, for example, spending a year working to earn the money to do an MSc in learning how to do GIS, or following through the PhD to learn how to program and do large-scale data manipulation. And even now, I'm really focusing on how I create basically an online course. There's a lot of skills involved in that beyond just the actual programming and analysis of it. But within all these aspects of every time I start a new part in my career, I'm always thinking, what skills am I learning and what skills am I going to be able to show off by the end of it? And whilst from the outset, if you think of going from an MSc, training in GIS, and then going into a PhD, and then going into a lectureship in spatial data science, it's a lot of obviously technical skills to do with programming and data analysis. But what I will say is that, and it kind of reflects on a bit of the CV talk, which is that along the way, there's been a lot of non-GIS-y skills which have proven invaluable. One of the things I did in my undergraduate career is I decided to be part of a newspaper. And during that time, I learned how to use InDesign and graphic software. And obviously now in cartography, having that skill set is essential. But it was also a really fantastic approach to become a freelance graphic designer for a little bit. I used that to earn money during my MSc to basically help support that. Another skill set that has been refreshed this year is iMovie, which I learned during my A-level media studies. I cannot believe this, like an A-level in media studies has led to me being able to use iMovie and basically record and edit my lecture videos really, really well. And then in addition, website building. So MySpace was the cool thing to do at 13 years old, I remember. But then in my early 20s, again, in between the time between my MSc and my PhD, when I had a little bit more spare time, I actually spent time building my own website, which was about me and basically building this idea of a portfolio, which was covered in that CV aspect, which allowed me to learn basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which has been really, really useful this year as I've started to transition my courses online and basically use the R Studio ecosystem to do that. So for me, what it is, it's about driving, with your careers, it's about driving forward skill sets in so many different areas that aren't just necessarily programming and data analysis if you want to end up in spatial data science, because it really is like this huge, like there's a whole package out there that you have to sort of keep building and refining as you go forwards to really sort of sell yourself. And this is where I'm annoyed that I can't show you my slides, is because that's, for example, the last year that I felt that I've done. For example, you can go onto my GitHub right now, and my entire undergraduate module is now online with all these wonderful films that I've made and everything else. But it's something that I can now share moving forwards for promotions, things like that, and other job applications, that I have this online course that people can access and see. So for me,
sorry, Joe, about a minute left if you have to.
Okay, a minute left. Yeah, that's perfect, actually. So for me, yeah, if you're looking for a career in GIS or specifically spatial data science, for example, it is really about building those skills. And how do you do that? For me, it's two things of setting yourself apart. What I do, my strategy nowadays is see what the best in your field are doing, and I try to emulate that. Yes, that sounds a bit like copying, but why not? It seems to be working out very well for example, my field specific lecturers who have these online courses. I want to be like them. So that's what I've done, is built this online course. The other thing is to do with the CVs and applications, is that I very much always try to show passion in my work and research. I'm really frustrated not to be able to show you for example, my cover letter to UCL is that the opening line to my cover letter in UCL was, "I believe we are without doubt in a time of substantial opportunity within the teaching of geography," which is quite a commanding opening line to a cover letter, rather than "I'm applying for a job." Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, but it's about being a bit more setting yourself apart is what I can recommend. And on the note of the CV, is that, again, I wish I could have shown you slides, which is my CV itself has very, very much maps on it. For every single location in which I have done something, I have a tiny little OpenStreetMap square of where that place is, which again just shows a level of detail and enthusiasm for example, in my case, spatial data science and cartography. And as a result, and again shows those skill sets.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you very much, Joe. No, that was fascinating to hear. Please do share a link to your GitHub and all the other bits in the chat in whatever way you want to, and we can certainly get those slides circulated as well afterwards. I'm really looking forward to seeing them. And it is a really key thing that you pulled out about skills. And, we have skills that we directly learn, so coding, GIS, blah, blah, blah. We have skills that we pick up elsewhere. So you talked about serving coffee, and I'm sure you dealt with some difficult customers serving coffee, but that's a really useful skill working in consultancy or working in academia, dealing with difficult colleagues, frankly, and, working with people at different levels and talking to them. And that's a really useful skill. And then you mentioned about learning iMovie, and you probably never thought that was going to be useful. But, look where we are and look how important a skill that is. So you never know what might be useful. So we've got some time for questions. So probably it's easiest if you post your questions in the chat. We've had a few, some through already. So I'll read them out and then we can have the panelists answer them. So first of all, from Adam Collins. In your experiences, were there any particular skills that you felt gave you an advantage in gaining work in the industry? So I'm happy for any of the kind of panelists to chip in if somebody would like to go first. Go on, Charles.
Yeah, sure. I think the main one that certainly cut across a lot of what I am involved in is the ability to not necessarily program at a high level, but understand code. I think unusually at least in terms of what I do now as a product manager, I think one of the things that makes me slightly more unusual is that I had the programming background. So it meant that I could be a product manager on both sides, because usually a product manager is often more commercially minded about how the product fits the market. But I can also look the other way in what are the technical things we need to do to build the thing that we take to market. So I'm a lot further away from it than I was in the start of the company, but I think the ability to understand code but not necessarily write it is an important feature of, frankly, the modern world, but especially in a lot of the work that I see in the geospatial world now, and especially the stuff that we get involved in. So I think that's probably the thing I would say.
Cool, great. Thanks, Charles. Anyone else like to comment on their particular skills that gave them an advantage?
Can I say something?
Yeah, go for it, Jack.
I think building on that is identifying that. So one of the things that I do talk about to my undergraduates and what I did previously at Southampton is that tell them that there's different ways of learning programming for different applications within GIS. For example, for me, I'm learning, I code in Python and R and a little bit of obviously web code because I am a data analyst. That is my role, that's my job, and then I'm using code to basically host a website. However, there's people out probably sat here right now who are GIS developers who are using, I don't know, I don't want to say things like C++ and JavaScript and things like this, and then obviously database code, etc. And as a result, there's so many different types of ways of understanding how you can use programming with GIS. You kind of have to understand what those applications are. But yeah, so anyone in data analysis, obviously learning R, Python, and SQL will really stand you out. But then if you're going into development, etc., that might be a different language, for example.
Cool, great, thanks, Joe. I think, yeah, let's move on to the next question now. So Patrick Valentine, does having a PhD make much difference in comparison to having a master's when looking to find a job in industry? He sees lots of adverts looking for master's graduates, but rarely sees PhD as a desirable qualification.
I'll come in there, Nick. In the first instance, I think it can do, but it depends. Which is probably not the helpful answer, but certainly in my experience, the in consultancy, working with kind of banks and what have you in the kind of international development space, many of those banks want you to be what's called kind of a key expert. To be a key expert, a PhD is seen as being one of the kind of feathers in the cap or the requirements. So that's certainly been helpful, and I think more generally it's kind of helped my CV go up the pile a little bit. I would also say, just kind of in my experience in kind of financial services, more recently, there are more and more kind of analytical roles that are requiring PhDs, and I see it quite frequently now in financial services. So yeah, maybe a growing requirement, but certainly hasn't done me or many others that I know any harm at all.
Mm-hmm. Great, cool, thanks, Paul.
I'll pop in on that one as well if you want, Nick. I think it's probably a neutral effect. In consultancy, absolutely right. Paul is right that you even just having the doctor on the business card helps in terms of credibility, but the skills you gain in terms of being able to interact with people and undertake that independent research is useful. But I don't think it's by any means required or expected. And often what I found in my experience is that our students effectively have a bit of a salary gap. They come in terms of having finished a PhD after 4 years doing the PhD at the same salary level as they would if they were master's graduates. So if they've done a master's and then a PhD, for many industry roles, what that means is you're not going up the salary scale by 4 years worth. So I think neutral from my point of view. I certainly not required in some roles. Yes, it can be advantageous. Certainly once you're getting to a sort of more senior level in your career, it sort of compounds that seniority and people go, oh yes, doctor, whoever, that's great. But yeah, I think people can be a bit disappointed with salary. So if it's something you're thinking about, you think, oh, well, I want to go into industry, but maybe I'll just stay in academia a little bit longer and do a PhD. Yeah, it's probably not greatly helping you. But if you're there and you're enjoying the PhD and it's that opportunity to do something, it's a rare opportunity because it's an opportunity for you to do exactly what you want to do, and you'll never ever have that in your life again. You'll always be doing something that the business wants you to do or your boss wants you to do. So it's a very rare opportunity to do something you want to do, unless you happen to be working in academia. Yeah, value it, enjoy it, and it certainly will give you a degree of maturity beyond where you are at the moment.
Cool, thanks, Bruce. Sam, can you comment on the public sector or your experience of it and PhDs?
I think probably just echoing what Bruce just said, really, that not a requirement, but nice to have. I know I work with people in the same team as me in Senedd who have PhDs, and it does give them an element of credibility, if you like. If oh yes, you've got a PhD in a mathematical related subject, therefore you're going to be able to do. You've shown your credentials, if you like, in your expertise in doing analysis and stats and things. So, but I don't have a PhD, and I worked in academia for 10 years or so, and then gone on to the Senedd. So, yeah, I think as Bruce said, not a requirement, but it's certainly nice to have if you're on that pathway.
Great, thanks, Sam. I'll just add in my two penneth, because I work freelance for a significant chunk of my time, and I think from that point of view, doing the PhD gave me the project management skills to be able to run my own company. Because doing a PhD, you are essentially you're not quite working on your own, but you're doing a lot of the stuff yourself, and it's what do you want. How do you manage your time? How do you arrange meetings to your supervisor, etc., etc.? And so I've used a lot of my skills from my PhD in running my own business. So there's some really useful skills there. But, of course, there are many people running their own businesses without a PhD. So, pros and cons. Thank you very much, everyone. Just to say thank you very much to all the panelists. It's been great to have you along. Thank you to everyone who's presented. Thank you to everyone who's asked questions. It's been a great discussion.